I have the tremendous honor and pleasure of having had the chance to work with Michael and his team on some projects. We have some big plans coming out moving forward. We're very excited about that, but the conversation we are going to have today is really rooted in the principles of fundamental implementation and that hard grinding work of actually planting those seeds, husbanding those plants, and then hoping that you reap the benefits of them going forward. We have some incredible practitioners on the stage today. I'd like to start with the icon, the Honorable Mayor Shirley Franklin. She's told me to keep the introduction short, but you can go to Wikipedia, and that ain't short. She has done so much. My favorite, though, accomplishment in her long, storied, and continuing career of change is her work as the Chief Administrative Officer here in Atlanta. As someone who served in a role like that, game sees game, I know how hard that job is. I also want to welcome Commissioner Rodney Ellis, who represents Precinct 1, the core, the heart, the beating heart of Houston, one of our most diverse and fantastic international cities in this country. Your history of building, your history of deep passion and commitment to social and criminal justice reform is just an inspiration, and I appreciate that. And we're also joined by a practitioner, someone who has to convert the brilliant ruminations and ideas of leaders such as you into the actual physical outcome. Jeff Williams of Perkins & Will. My favorite fun fact of Jeff's is that he actually worked for Shirley. He worked for Mayor Franklin here in Atlanta in the planning office. So that idea of learning how from the inside and then continuing the work from the outside is so valuable and so important. I know that there are people in this room who share those kinds of experiences. But I want to put you on the spot, Mayor, if you don't mind. The architect of modern London, Christopher Wren, on his grave, famously says, "Si monumentum requiris perspicere." So if it's his monument you seek, look around you. If I were to seek the monument of the hard work of you and your team over history, I know I can go to the International Civil Rights Walk of Fame and see a step there celebrating your work. But what would you choose to point to as something that your work laid the seeds and the foundation for?
Well, there are two answers to that. So I'm known as the sewer mayor. Much of my work was around the challenge of doing combined sewer overflow improvements under a consent decree. So I believe that the history will say that Shirley Franklin was a sewer mayor. But because one needs clean potable water and clean wastewater, that project is what has allowed Atlanta, that project's investment has allowed Atlanta to grow, and to grow exponentially over the last 20 years. So I could claim other things, but the fact of the matter is the economic strength of the city is based on its infrastructure. And that is not something that people see, although I did take people on tours of the tunnels that we built 200 feet down, just to make it real. So I would say that is the answer. But as a former mayor, really the engagement of people in the city on various elements of the city's development. Once we got past sewers, then people had lots of other ideas about things we could do, and one of them was the Beltline.
We'll come back to the Beltline, because that one we can't not talk about. But Commissioner Ellis, on that same front, one of the things that you've worked so hard on is flood control. Again, the unseen kind of systems that actually create the platform, the foundation for society to build on top of. What are some of the projects that you've worked on that you think express the legacy of your leadership and the people you represent?
Well, as is the case with most of us in politics, and if you've lasted as long as I have, most of us have a little attention deficit disorder. Okay. So it's kind of, when you're in a position where you have the public's trust and a little power, you're kind of all over the board. Criminal justice reform will probably define my legacy. I chaired the Board of Innocence Project for about 14 years. But after Harvey, folks in this room, whether you're from Georgia or wherever, you will always remember those images of the fourth largest city in America being underwater, seeing the freeways just look like rivers. And you all sent us money, you sent supplies. Shirley called and asked, could I swim? It was just frightening. But we did come up with local money, $2.5 billion, which was unprecedented in local money. Most water-related tragedy money follows something called a cost-benefit ratio. That means you take care of the wealthy neighborhoods like the one I'm in now, or I live in now, as opposed to the one that I came out of. So we came up with an equity framework on how we would spend our money, so we wouldn't chase that federal money. But look, related to what we're doing now, when you got all of this green space that you've created to keep from flooding, all impervious cover, all of these freeways, streets, they create an environment where the water has nowhere to go. So what we're trying to do is take some of those bayous, those natural spaces, and do something with them. And we're doing a lot of that in Houston, which I think might be a template for what other cities will look at when you have to reclaim this land for its natural purposes. And that vision there is a park in downtown Houston that Michael and his team, Walter Hood, will work on, called the Remembrance Park. It ties in with my career. There's a jail across the street. Those look like windows. That's really so we don't feel so bad from locking people up in it. That is the second largest county jail in the country. We're right behind LA. LA is doing more to decrease their jail population. So if we don't do something, we'll be the largest one. So we're going to create that green space in the heart of downtown Houston to tell the story of enslaved Africans and African Americans and their contributions to the third largest county, fourth largest city in America. And the story will continue because the jail is right across the bayou, which floods on a regular basis.
Wow. Jeff, you have the enviable/unenviable job of trying to, you don't get to, well, maybe for your kids and your grandkids, you get to say, this is my legacy. You don't get to necessarily put your name on it. How do you help realize the vision of leaders like these, recognizing that the seeds they're going to plant may take a generation to actually sprout?
First, I'm humbled to be on this stage, that, I fill the role, I guess, as the practitioner here in the group. And very much I've spent my career as a worker bee in a hive that others have created, structures and visions that others have created. You mentioned I began my career as the lowliest intern in Mayor Franklin's planning department. And over the last 2 decades have seen the Beltline into construction and its transformation of the city, a vision that wasn't mine, but one that I applied my labor to. And I think there's a lesson here for students. I think if there's any legacy, it's taking the umbrella of leadership that was put before me here in Atlanta that I think is unique here in Atlanta, a city that is enacting change on things that are slow to change, infrastructure in particular, and taking those lessons to other cities. And I think people are looking to Atlanta for inspiration, the Beltline being one of those examples.
Okay, so we're here at the Beltline. We got here. And we were talking a little earlier about how long realizing a vision like the Beltline takes. Can you give us a little sense, Mayor, how did you grapple with the vision of the Beltline, and how did you see how did you see through the process to begin implementation of something that you knew would, if it worked well, last well beyond your time there?
So it started in politics. The person who won the election for city council, president, and I met before the election and agreed that we would meet weekly, one-on-one, no staff, just to have conversation about city issues. And there were a lot of challenges in the city. There was budget problems. I talked about the water consent decree. There was just a lot of challenges in the city. So I had an agenda related to city services and municipal services. After every meeting, at the end of the meeting, she would talk to me about the Beltline. She would talk about how important it was. She had been able to advocate with the city council to get it in the comprehensive development plan for the city. She had met with Ryan Gravel. They had done a lot of civic engagement at the neighborhood level. And at the end of her pitch, I would say, I'm busy, I don't have time. I got other things to do. She decided to leave city government and run for Congress. So in our last, this is several years later, now this is 52 weeks a year that we're having this conversation. She decides to run for Congress and resigns from her position. And in our last meeting, she gave me the Beltline. She said, okay, the Beltline is yours. I'm like, I don't want it. I'm knee deep in other things. But she was persuasive, so I said, okay, we'll study it. And so we used a process that I used multiple times, which is I had a neighborhood leader and the president of Georgia State University, who was a city planner, Carl Patton, and asked them to chair a feasibility committee and gave them 120 days and with some funding for expertise to allow for community engagement and also expertise on whether this was even a feasible idea to pursue. They came back and said yes. Then I formed another committee, outside committee, chaired by a developer, Ray Weeks, and who had just sold his company, so I thought he had some free time. And an executive, a top executive from UPS, and gave them 120 days. They took a little longer than that. And they actually worked on the plan with city staff, with our economic development staff. All of this now we're now a year into conversation. We're not telling anyone that we're doing the Beltline, that we're thinking about the Beltline. We're just doing the background work. Then they come back and say, okay, this is worth pursuing. And it goes to the economic development staff of the city, who then worked on it another 18 months to 2 years. So before we actually announced, this will be strange to my friend Rodney, who was more of the announce and then figure it out.
Okay, there's a spectrum here.
Right,
all right, we got it.
But this comes from my city management experience. We then decided that we would take on the Beltline, and we're about 3.5 years into our research and development. And unlike the other plans we did, which were 10-year plans, my one contribution, aside from saying I'd take it on, was to say we needed to do a 25-year plan. And I've got a friend who is a former county commissioner, Michael Hightower here. And the reason for 25 years is that we had taken so much time doing this that I was determined that no future elected official could undo it. So we put in the checks and balances so that the project would be sustained over 25 years, and we're in year 2021 now.
All right. Commissioner Ellis, I'm going to give you a moment to rebut. No, I'm kidding, but
I never win.
no, well, yeah, but it'd be fun to watch. We're in this moment of the abundance discussion where there's a lot of introspection about process, community engagement, systems, whether we're talking too much and doing too little. We have a stark example of the far extreme of that as a bulldozer runs through the east wing of the White House with no notice. The mayor was saying that the process the mayor described was a process of engagement and patience. How do you think about those processes when sometimes that can run out the clock on the actual ability to implement?
I think there's a balance to it. My politics is extremely progressive. I'm in Texas, and I'm probably one of the more foremost criminal justice reformers and passing stuff in a right-wing state. But look, you have to work with the cards that you're given. Most of the art that we do, most of the design for public spaces was not designed for people who look like me, or look like Shirley. And whether we realize it or not, most people are a little intimidated by something that doesn't look like them. We were joking about the murals that I'm doing in Houston, which is the easy, cheap way to make a profound statement because people see it. And sometimes people, was a Harriet Tubman mural on a cotton exchange building. And a friend of mine, and Maxine Waters was in town, Congresswoman Ellis, she said, how in the hell did you get that on that building in downtown Houston? Boy, are you crazy? And I said, well, the county owns the building. So cotton was so big, we had 2 cotton exchange buildings. So I put it there, and some people were offended. And they said, well, do you put any white people on murals? I said, yeah, well, actually, it's pretty diverse. But you don't notice them because most of us are accustomed to them. So you see a person of color, you overreact. Let's just be real in this environment. If you're talking about doing art that relates to public spaces, that relates to people of color, you can engage and you run the risk of enraging.
Right.
And the person in the White House will shut down your federal money. Some legislator may go put in a bill to just stop you. So there's a delicate balance there. Now what Mayor Franklin did, which was brilliant, she mentioned in the back room, I was a merchant of debt. If you recall, you helped me under Mayor Jackson get a little bond business here in Atlanta for my firm. If you issue bonds, you not only have a plan, you tie in future funding.
Right.
Somebody can undo it, but it's going to cost money to do it. So look, it's just a delicate balance. I started off on that park in downtown Houston. I went to the opening of a lynching memorial in Montgomery. I didn't meet Michael then, I met him later. I was with Reverend Jesse Jackson, I was inspired. I just wanted to markers. And I put together a big committee. There's a process that Brian Stevenson has where you collect the dirt, so engagement. And then I got 50 people, and we go on around and around about where to put the lynchers of the 4 people lynched in Harris County. So when I found out I controlled this park in downtown, I said, well, to me, that's a no-brainer. Let's put them downtown. But then the committee said, 50 people, everybody wanted them in their neighborhoods. They wanted where the people would lynch. Well, the people who own that land don't want a lynching marker in front of their house. And it's an unzoned city. I can't do that. So I had to work around them, add some more folks to the committee. And so sometimes, look, a lot of this public engagement is the ones who yell the loudest and are more creative at it. So I just added some other people who could yell. And now we're going to put it in downtown. And then I finally admitted I didn't really want to do this, but since you all insist, but I just want to stress in this environment, if Brian Stevenson, he's told me, and so did Darren Walker, who put up most of the funding from the Ford Foundation, if they had gone to the legislature or the mayor of Montgomery at the time and said what they were doing, they would have shut that down. Now it's the biggest economic draw in the state in terms of tourism visits. It used to be the NASA site, not the state capitol. After the Montgomery boycott, Montgomery went down. Now the #1 site for visiting in Montgomery, Alabama is Montgomery. I mean, the state of Alabama is Montgomery because of that. So you don't go overboard with the community. It's important. You need it. You can't just spend the public's money without the public having some input. But you got to be more inclusive. And at some point, for God's sake, just decide. I would prefer to do the wrong thing than to do nothing.
So what you're describing then is this balance between engagement and leadership.
And I'm adding the element of enraging in this environment. Okay. If you're talking about diverse projects that involve women, people of color, there is an element with a lot of power in this country that will shut down the project before you get it going.
Now, Mayor, what the commissioner was just talking about was these processes that certain people get to participate in, but as you both in your work, you represent communities that don't necessarily have the resources, and I mean the resources in terms of time, information, attention, ability to participate. So as you've pointed out, sometimes the people who go to the meetings are just the people who have the time and have the real axe to grind. How, Mayor, do you balance that in executing the leadership for the kind of multi-year investment with substantial resources? How do you balance that? How do you make sure those voices that can't show up are in fact heard?
Well, you have to go to them as opposed to asking them to come to you. And as wonderful as technology is in opening doors for access to dialogue and discussion and information, everyone doesn't use it as well. And I'm of the generation that is barely transferred to technology. So you have to go to the people. And I learned this in my political career, mostly with Maynard Jackson and Andrew Young, both former mayors, and Andrew Young, obviously, a ambassador and a member of Congress. You have to go to people, and you can't be put off by, unlike Rodney, who's been elected most of his public career, I've been staffed most of my public career. So I was the person who was going to the meetings and being
chewed up.
But here's my philosophy about that. If the public debate has to exaggerate or give misinformation, I won't call it lies, but misinformation, I actually want to hear that, because that tells me where the edge of the argument is and allows me to use what I know or what we can gather as information to win the argument. Now that takes patience. It takes more listening than talking. But it is a balance. I'm not suggesting that you're always trying to reach a consensus. I always tried to have an open dialogue, a respectful dialogue. But I was clear about who had the decision making. And in our case, it was the city council, which is the governing authority, and the mayor. And in the case of the city council, I'm not looking for a unanimous vote. I'm just looking for the votes that are required under the rules and under the rules that we are operating under, which was the majority. A unanimous vote in the City Council of Atlanta during my terms of working in the city over 21 years, every vote more than the majority was a very costly vote. You started to compromise away the core issues. So I never looked at it as an opportunity for people to like the project or to like me or to like the argument. That really isn't it. I'm just trying to get to the majority vote, just to the majority vote, and using a fact-based, research-based set of arguments, even when it's something that's visionary. And that's what we talked about the Beltline, so I'll just use that as an example. But even for water and sewer, we did 200 community meetings in communities to talk about why we were going to triple water and sewer rates. That was not viewed favorably. My mentors told me I could not get reelected doing that. But I decided that the job was already hard, and that if I was going to go to work every day and work hard, I might as well get something significant done. And therefore, I was willing, and I'm not suggesting other people are willing, should be willing. I was willing to take the chance that the idea or the project or the initiative or the decision would be seen as okay after the fact. The Beltline, people love it now. There was tremendous political pushback to the Beltline. And I can't think of a single piece of legislation, significant piece of legislation in the city of Atlanta that got more than a majority vote. Because I didn't count past 8.
Yeah. Well, Commissioner Ellis earlier on said if you have a unanimous vote, you're probably not doing anything, right? You're probably not pushing hard enough. Jeff, you get to go to other cities and get to other countries. What are some of the best practices you've seen in this spectrum of leadership and engagement?
Well, I mean, it's I've learned more about myself at public meetings than just about any other forum in my life. And I'm taking notes here. Consensus through dilution, count to 8. All right. I actually think that there's a lot of wisdom in the communities that we engage with. I mean, very often we're tasked with results. That there's a vision, objective, change here, redevelopment there, and we need to go through this community to do it. And we go out there and we try to listen. And I think when you listen, there's actually very straightforward concerns. Local example here, the redevelopment around Turner Field after the Braves vacated the stadium. Everything was no. And listening to the community, I mean, this is a community that had been impacted by the spillover impacts of a stadium for decades and lacked basic services. And basic services were all that they were looking for. And we were able to help them see that basic services can come with redevelopment and pave the way for what we see in Summerhill now. There's examples everywhere we go, listening about water in West Savannah. The city invests money in an arena and entertainment facility that brings transformation and redevelopment. The heart there is water, flooding in those communities, and we're able to take that wisdom and use that to drive a project forward. We're obviously operating at a much lower level than these folks, but also operating sometimes much closer to those communities.
Great. Commissioner Ellis, you've focused your work, as you said, on the hard work of social change, criminal justice reform. But one of my fun facts about you is that you're an avid bicyclist. Your work in developing parks connects to your interest in connecting people to nature and the outdoors, fitness and the opportunities. Can you talk a little bit about how these two big ideas actually intersect with your deep desire of bringing art more out to folks where they are?
Houston's flat is obviously hot as well. We have these bayous that if you're from out of town, you think they're rivers, but they're bayous. It's really God's way, or nature's way, of getting the water to the Gulf of Mexico. Right. And when I was in the state Senate, people knew I biked, so they came to me and they said, we need a bipartisan campaign. So we have one of President Bush's nephews. We will make co-chair of this effort, and we want to make you the other co-chair. Obviously, that black vote was going to be important. I met Brian Gravel then. We came over and looked at early plans of the Beltline. So in Houston, as a result of that, the voters approved it. Philanthropic money put up about $200 million. They want to go to Anise Parker, was mayor of Houston. I was in the Senate, and asked her, I think they were trying to get $100 million. And they said they wanted to know how to ask her. I said, well, don't go in there and ask her for $100 million if that's what you want. Go in there and ask for $200 million. And be happy if you get 50.
Budget trick, right.
And so they said, well, will you go with us? I said, sure. And I'm going to show up on my bike, just put it downstairs, act like in that heat I was really riding my bike in a suit. And look, it passed. We had paved 150 miles of protected cement lanes along these bayous, all neighborhoods. The challenge is they all go in the same direction. You got to go through city streets to connect them. Most people don't, the Beltline's a circle. Most people don't want to go this way and come back that way. They want to go around. So then the challenge is, I was in the Senate, I didn't have a budget. When I went to the county, I have a budget. So I started investing under the previous mayor, county money on city streets. It's not my job.
Right.
But if I'm going to do it, I want a complete street. Or fine, I'm not going to do it. Right. And previous mayor, I should have done more. I shouldn't have taken so long. It was controversial. A lot of neighborhoods fought it, but we should have done that quicker. But then people have to have something to look at. So you put along these trails. That's by Texas Southern. We put local heroes up on the artwork. In downtown Houston, it's kind of how I started on the murals. I think I kind of went overboard. I think I'm up to about 70 of them.
Wait, you're just saying you should have done more?
Well, on the streets, on the bike lanes. But on the murals, all of them relate. I believe in art with a purpose. We were talking about that earlier. So you see these beautiful pictures, it's to lull you in. Right. All of them relate to the United Nations Sustainability Goals. They're 19, I think, 17 and 19. Well, we in Houston, you got to tell us 4 or 5 times. So you keep putting another mural up relating to a UN goal. So hopefully when you look at the picture, then you'll go to the IQ deal, go up to the QR deal, and see what it's about. But look, I think art is a way of letting people connect with other communities, with other cultures. So I believe it makes a difference. I couldn't imagine a building without art in it. They joke when I was in the Senate, I love African art. They'd take a little tour and I'd hear this young Nigerian curator saying, oh, this here is Mr. Mandela's office, because all this African art was in it. No dead governors, didn't even have a flag. Michael Hightower up in office. But great art, and I think it helps. You know, if you're in a classroom, studies show if you have more glass, you pay more attention when you can look out. And if you have art, interesting things to look at, you all are paying more attention because something's flashing on that screen above us. So yeah, I think it's just a part of helping us become more creative. Yeah. And I'm doing it in poor neighborhoods as well. I hope they don't look back and say I'm foolish for spending that money. But I just think if you have art that helps people see themselves as part of the fabric of a community, it gives them more pride in it.
That's beautiful. Mayor Franklin, I'm going to let you take us out, but on this same theme, this is our World in Design Conference. So can you talk a little bit, your initial entree into local government was through arts and humanities, if I.
No, that's true. I was the volunteer chair of the arts committee that represented artists and institutions to give advice and counsel to Maynard Jackson in 1973. And I was asked because I wanted to be a ballerina and I love the arts, and he thought maybe I would be a good person to do it. So community engagement was my niche. But ignoring your question, the answer for me is there was a company that sent out a calendar when calendars were in paper. And every saying, every day had a saying. And the one that I quote the most and think the most about is the one that says, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And it was anonymous, but my theory of public work, civic work, professional work, challenges, finding solutions, and actually taking opportunities. We talk about finding solutions, but a lot of times we ignore opportunities. So I would just leave with you that a vision of what the future is, and the future is more than 5 years from now. It really goes back to Noguchi. One of our first efforts as that committee was to commission a Noguchi play sculpture in Piedmont Park. And that would have been in 1973, 1974. And that play sculpture still exists today. So that theory of creating something that is going to last and that people of all generations and all backgrounds can relate to and be a part of.
Well, thank you. We'll take that as the inspiration from this incredible panel. Thank you so much for joining us. And